For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Russia and China vetoed a U.S.-sponsored resolution at the United Nations Security Council today that called for an immediate and sustained ceasefire in Gaza. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, introduced it.
First and foremost, we want to see an immediate and sustained ceasefire as part of a deal that leads to the release of all hostages being held by Hamas and other groups, and that will allow much more life-saving humanitarian aid to get into Gaza.
Russia's ambassador Vasily Nebenzia said while Moscow supports an immediate ceasefire, the U.S. resolution is misleading.
And to ensure the impunity of Israel, whose crimes in the draft are not even assessed. I wish to draw attention to the following. The U.S. draft contains an effective green light for Israel to mount a military operation in Rafah. Nothing would prevent Western Jerusalem from continuing their brutal cleansing of the south of the Gaza Strip. And what is Washington actually trying to achieve?
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he's ready to go it alone in a ground invasion into Rafah. In a statement after meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Tel Aviv today, the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt are trying to broker a ceasefire hostage swap deal between Israel and Hamas as the war drags on in Gaza, and the death toll has likely surpassed 32,000. World Health Organization Director Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus warned the future of Gaza's entire generation is in peril as hunger spreads across the Gaza Strip and children die of starvation. The Republican MAGA Freedom Caucus is opposing a funding bill to keep several key government agencies open, leaving Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson relying on Democrats to ensure its passage. They face a midnight deadline or face a shutdown of defense agencies as well as education and labor. The $1.2 trillion measure combines 6 spending bills into one package. More than 70% of the money will go to defense. It includes Republican demands for a 24% increase of detention beds for undocumented immigrants and Democratic demands for a $1 billion increase in funding for child care. The funding bill omits funding for UNRWA, the UN aid agency for Palestinians, after allegations from Israel say some of its staff, 12, were involved in Hamas attacks. The UN says those staff were tortured by Israeli forces into giving false confessions, which has prompted several nations to restore UNRWA funding, including Australia, Canada, Portugal, Sweden, and the European Commission. Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders slammed the decision to cut UNRWA funding out of the U.S. bill, speaking on the Senate floor this week.
Tens of thousands of people are starving. UNRWA is trying to feed them, and the Israeli government and its allies like AIPAC spend much of their time lobbying to defund UNRWA, the major organization which is feeding starving people. Sadly, tragically, many members of Congress seem to be happy to be part of this starvation caucus, happy to cut funding for UNRWA and make it harder to get aid to Palestinians in the midst of this crisis.
The U.S. was UNRWA's largest donor, giving up to $400 million annually. New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez says he will not run in the Democratic primary as he faces federal corruption charges, but he left open the possibility of re-entering the race as an independent if he's exonerated at trial. Menendez made the announcement in a video released Thursday. Menendez is accused of taking bribes of gold bars, cash, and a Mercedes-Benz in return for his help with projects pursued by 3 New Jersey businessmen. The last of 2 law enforcement officers in Mississippi were given 10 to 40-year prison sentences Thursday for torturing 2 black men, including waterboarding, raping, and shooting one of the men in the face, then devising a cover-up that included planting drugs in a gun. In all, 6 deputies and officers were sentenced for those heinous crimes. An investigation by the Associated Press linked some of the deputies to at least 4 violent encounters with black men since 2019 that left 2 dead and another with lasting injuries. Malik Shabazz is an attorney for the victims. Corey Jenkins and Eddie Terrell Parker.
It's your time for atonement.
That's right.
Rankin County. It's your time to keep pace now with Judge Lee and the justice that's going on in this state. Step up, Rankin County.
That's right.
And show that you can put a new sheriff in office that's not presided over the blood and the torture that was evident at the highest levels in your department.
He says they're revisiting other cases in Rankin County, Mississippi. It's World Water Day. Environmental advocates are calling on Congress to reinstate protections for streams. Suzanne Potter reports.
This year, advocates in the U.S. are pressing Congress to reinstate Obama-era Clean Water Act protections for smaller seasonal streams, safeguards that were struck down last May by the conservative majority on the Supreme Court. The Clean Water Act of 2023 would restore the Waters of the United States rule. It has more than 120 co-sponsors, but remains stalled in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm Suzanne Potter.
I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for Pacifica Radio.